Hey, good morning, everyone. And the mic's working. It sounds good. I hear it. Again, my name's Dave Myers, and it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I know you're excited about getting into the vineyard business and growing vines. It's a pretty exciting challenge, and so I wish you good luck with that. One thing I wanted to share with you is just this concept of what do you need? What should we buy? What shouldn't we buy? What should we rent? Should we buy used? Should we buy new? A lot of decisions have to be made that are going to really affect your bottom line, and also I like to think that we choose machinery to help us, do what we want with a little bit of pleasure, derive a little pleasure out of it. So the vineyard team, as Southern Maryland, we had a research vineyard at Upper Marlboro facility from 2001 to 2016, 16 years. So a lot of the photos that you see will be from the Upper Marlboro facility as we went through the years of really enjoying the project. And I don't know if Joe mentioned, but we had 27 different vinifera varieties when we first started the project in 2001 and trialed another 11 additional varieties. And so we ended up with about 37 different varieties and a few hybrids at Upper Marlboro. And one of the things that I did right from the beginning was I kept track of every little penny, right to the penny, and every amount of money that was put in and all the different things in the first 2 years. So I really did do really good due diligence to capturing the cost. And not only the cost, but the time. And so I really enjoyed the slide here. And you can find this vineyard reckoning document on my website in Anne Arundel County. Even though it might be dated, it's 2001, and you might have to multiply by 30 or 40%. I think you'll see at least the time factor hasn't changed. You're still going to require an amazing amount of time, 634 hours to put to 1 acre in 2 years, 634 hours. So that's the time, you can really start to understand that time commitment. Small tools and hand tools are really something you really want to invest in quickly. You want good quality. Pruning is something you're going to be doing a lot of. Ben will talk a little bit about pruning later on this afternoon. When you're starting to get into harvest, you got to harvest into something. You're going to need lugs, and so the list goes on. Of course, establishing trellis, and there's a whole host of equipment that'll make that much easier and safer. We're going to talk a little bit about safety too, because you can get hurt. I've been in agriculture my whole life. Before I came into University of Maryland, I was a dairy farmer for 18 years. And you kind of give yourself a pep talk, let's try to stay safe out there, let's not get hurt. And so you want to make sure that. Here's that document of time. And you can see, you think about all those different tasks, and you can see you rack up the hours over 2 years. And you start, even if you put, let's say, $15 an hour, that's quite a bit of money commitment too, if you're hiring labor. But most of you will do it, it'll be a labor of love for you. But still think about that time and all those different things that you will be doing in your vineyard for those first years. And, just putting in auger anchors, it's 15 hours, on, a 1 acre, just to twist those augers in the ground, So, and it's kind of a little bit grueling at times out there doing establishment. So my favorite slide is to add fun and remove drudgery, and that's what machinery does. And so we really do want to add fun and remove drudgery. And here's an interesting report, 1918, from my first county agent in Anne Arundel County, my home county, which is the county that I'm at, the extension agent, and I've been 23 years in that county now as extension agent. And they're putting a vineyard in Anne Arundel County. And I'm thinking, wow, in 1918, so right from the beginning, vineyards have been part of Maryland. And I'm pretty sure, maybe that was for jelly and preserves, but I have a feeling that it was probably more for wine. So think about your shop area too. Storage of equipment is really important, especially keeping things out of the weather, keeping things organized and neat. There again. Things can pile up pretty quickly, trip hazards, stumble hazards, and next thing you know, you're laid up. And so make sure, especially if you have workers, the last thing you want is someone getting hurt on the job that you're bringing in to help you out. And so think about an organized shop. Repair is something, when I think about a shop, is something that hopefully you do want to be engaged in. Some people want to be hands off and they'll have a technician come in and repair. But I think repairing is something that you probably should become kind of diligent in, and think about how you can take care of your machinery and the maintenance and maybe be involved in that, and sharpening the pruning shears and all. There's a lot of things that have to be done. There's a lot of, we can go through all the different catalogs and different vendors out there. And, well, you know, it's really increased since 2001. The opportunity for really buying some pretty amazing, helpful tools and equipment has really changed. It's, you know, as I look at how, excuse me, how ergonomically things have gotten and how more comfortable even a pair of pruning shears in your hand can be now compared to they were, you know, 20 years ago. So it really is kind of neat to see the suppliers like Orchard Valley and Kenco Fencing, and you know, you're starting to think about buying, you know, the right size trellis wire, cordon wire versus catch wires, and the different gauges that you're going to need. You're going to want zinc plated, and you know, it's just so much to learn. And Kenco Fencing Company actually has a really nice little just trellis and canopy guide for developing trellises just for vineyards. And so you might want to maybe contact Kenco, because you probably won't find it online. You're probably going to have to call them and say, I'd like to have that vineyard edition of your fencing guide. And so if, that's common. They'll have better grower and more detailed information and literature to describe what they sell for the one that they don't consider the homeowner, right? They really think, hey, you're in the business, and we have much better reference materials. And so request those extra reference materials from all your vendors specific to your craft. Spec trellising, the one that I use quite a bit of for buying things. And we think about, another thing I think about in the vineyard is, you know, depending on where you're at in the state, I work with the Southern Maryland growers, and you know, I always say, hey, maximize your advantages when you have more heat units and more growth periods. And so, you know, when you think about choosing those varieties, think about the advantages that you have in a particular region in the state. And they all have their advantages and maybe their disadvantages, but make sure you maximize your advantages when you pick varieties and pick how to trellis and how to, so make sure you pay attention to that. In the South, we're pretty hot. You can see that red zone there in the 5 Southern Maryland counties. And you know, I always tell them, ignore the textbooks and your northern neighbors. Pay attention to the people south of you. You know, so again, depending upon where you're at in the state, really think that through well. And there's no reason we had such vigorous growth, actually too vigorous a growth on good agricultural soils, that we had to start cropping earlier. It actually helped the vigor of the vine. So don't always pay attention to what they're telling you from Pennsylvania or somewhere north if you're happen to be in those southern varieties. You can see here, this is a Hudson River high wire for actually a table grape trellis. So you might use that for Labrusca type grapes. So, or maybe some hybrids like to tend to grow down in what they call an umbrella system. And so knowing the different trellises is very important. Here's May 2005, putting in some actually table grapes. But you can see by September, we've got completed the cordon establishment. So when you've done that, then you can think about cropping the next year. And so by the fall, that's just the second year. You know, just incredible cropping because of that advantage. And so, again, having all the equipment and everything, you know, in place right from the beginning is really critical. So earth anchors and everything's going to happen fairly quickly. Bamboo training stakes. You know, there's your heavy cordon wire up top, and this is the umbrella system. It kind of going to weep down on you, knowing how to prune and cane prune, and then eventually setting the crop. And you can see the cordon wood is already established. So again, I just want to encourage you to think that you're going to need all these supplies quicker than you think. You know, it's going to happen very quickly. You're going to put this vineyard out there and you're going to think, wow, look at this thing explode. And all of a sudden, if I didn't have my cordon wire up and I was thinking about just getting things, I would be already behind the curve and not likely to catch up, right? That's one of my favorite table grapes called Vanessa. Think about, you know, irrigation, especially if you're in those hotter climates or soils that tend to be droughty, higher sands. They can be wonderful for vineyard production, but that first year especially, that establishment year, irrigation will be essential if you want to establish that cordon and getting off. If we go to any kind of a drought, which we normally do, you know, normally the water stops around July 4th. It's just popcorn showers, and then we start back up about mid to late August again, and hopefully we don't get a hurricane. But it's just incredible to think, you know, we do know we have these sustained dry periods. And you don't want a sustained dry period when you're trying to establish a vineyard. So irrigation, especially in those establishment years, is very critical. And it can be critical for fruit sizing if we get into a dry period during that period of time when you're getting that quick grape cluster growth. you might want to have water at that time. So irrigation is something. I remember I was a dairy farmer. I think, if plants could move, they would be screaming out here in July in Maryland most of the times, right? And there'd be no question, hey, the plants are hollering, they need water. Unfortunately, it's up to us, right, to monitor those planting conditions. So Turquoise is a really good company located in our area. Zimmerman Irrigation is one that I typically deal with a lot of times, but I've also dealt with A.O. Newton on the shore and others. And so it's really good to find out what it take to put in a trickle system and be on top of that. And is my water source adequate? What do I need to do? Maybe I need some above ground holding tanks or something to make sure I can have successfully the number of acres that I want to put in irrigation water. And it really is cost effective. I mean, you can play around with small kits that might get you a half an acre fairly cheaply now, but you can really quickly up the game to whatever size you want as long as your water. And water is something you have to measure. So these systems can get pretty complicated and require a lot of water. An inch of water is about 27,000 gallons. And so, you've got to have, if you've got 5 or 8 acres going, you've got to have a lot of water resources available for you to run that irrigation, get it on quick enough to do some good. So you're not going to tax, your just regular household well for something like that, right? You're going to need maybe a 6-inch well, holding ponds or holding tanks to be able to go above, let's say, a 5-acre irrigation plan. A.M. Leonard is another company that I found pretty helpful with shears and just cost-effective tools. And so, again, just kind of, giving you some ideas of, you probably searched some of these places out before. And we got our little wonder, which was our trimmer. Southern Maryland, we get way too much vigor. We had an agricultural soil, and we were pruning, and it goes up over the canopy. The last thing we want was vinifera grapes kind of growing over top themselves, and so we ended up, maybe not the best method in the world, but we're going through and doing a little shearing, and it helped us stay ahead of the game. And so the idea is to get sunlight to the grapes and maximize the canopy. And you talk about all these different concepts, and sometimes it just gets out of control faster than you can even keep up with. So here's when the vineyard at Upper Marlboro was kind of really balanced itself pretty well. And at that point, vertical shoot position, you can see catch wires are in place, the anchoring wires are with the anchor earth augers, and we got a nice little run there. Good weed management. And so again, all very important, I think, to success in having a high quality or potential for a high quality grape crop. So we think about larger equipment, and more than likely you're probably thinking, I want to go out and get a vineyard tractor, and I got to get the best vineyard sprayer and all the different things. I want a dedicated herbicide sprayer, and these are good ideas, to have a dedicated sprayer that's going to put the fungicides and insecticides on, your canopy sprayer, and then have a floor sprayer that's going to be dedicated to some herbicides. And what kind of tractor, and then you think about, you could just start spending money like crazy, right? You could, especially these large equipment purchases. Sometimes buying new, maybe you can actually budget that better with depreciation over 10 years and better interest rates. But sometimes you might want to buy used or even rent or borrow, to try things out. So again, keep that in mind. Here's some pictures again back in 1916 in Anne Arundel County, and I think of the equipment back then. Tractors were just hitting the scene. And look at the little girl there in the bonnet. That's Anne Arundel County, right around Davidsonville. So it's really kind of cool, I think, to think of where we're at now with equipment. And so when I think about equipment, whatever that equipment is, this just happens to be a planter there. It could be anything. We want to pay close attention to how to operate. And so the best thing that little guy down there, what's the most important item a farmer should take to the field for equipment adjustment? And I usually think a big hammer is pretty good. But sometimes the big hammer might not be the first thing you want to put in motion on your new piece of equipment, right? And so it really pays to have the operator's manual, especially for equipment setup. And it really is amazing because you watch these videos about how this machine's supposed to do all these wonderful things, and then you put it in your field and it doesn't do all these wonderful things, right? Yeah. And then you scratch your head, and you think, what's going on? So they have to be set. Most machinery has to be set to do the job. And so there's a lot of adjustment to that. There's engineering to that. You almost have to be a little bit practical at that point. And a lot of times I say the best thing if something is not doing what it's supposed to do is just stop. Let's put the brakes on here and find out what we need to do to make this machine do what it wants to do. And what I always recommend is that when you take delivery, especially if it's a new machine, that you make sure you set up a time for the technician to be there at delivery. And they help you make all those adjustments to make the machine do what it's supposed to do. Because that'll probably save you a lot less stress and a lot digging through that operator's manual trying to figure it out, and maybe the big hammer, and maybe someone gets injured. And so there's a lot of things to think about. Having a technician bring up, especially if they're bringing a new tractor or they're bringing a new sprayer or something, have that technician come and help you set up and calibrate. And a lot of times they'll do that for you just to make the sale. So you negotiate that right into the sale. And then it might require extra attachments. It's not uncommon to see extra attachments be a requirement for a new piece of machinery to make it work. Okay, and when you're talking about maintenance, it's a constant battle. That's my old that's a 1941 tractor, right? It's pretty amazing, isn't it? 9N, Ford 9N, and it's still pretty functional tractor, but it had maintenance. Someone and myself, someone long before me, took the time to think about things like battling dirt and friction, right? I mean, it's just constant wearing and tearing down of your machinery. And so keep it clean and spot troubles and grease it, and lubricate, and all those things are very important for machinery. And so you can't ever overdo that. I remember some of the bosses that I used to have, we would grease things in the morning, we would have lunch, we would grease things in the afternoon, and then when we wrapped up the day, we greased things in the evening. And I'm thinking, well, we're going to grease them in the morning, but it didn't make any difference because we might not get a chance to grease them in the morning. So, I mean, they were just that diligent about maintenance, and it pays off. It pays off. That machinery will give you a life, and who knows, maybe like the tractor like that, maybe getting near 100 years. So what's a symptom of a failing part? Failing part.
Arthritis?
Hey, there you go, arthritis, a little gimp or something. No.
Noise.
Noise, very good. What else?
Heat.
Heat, smell, smoke, fire. Typically in that order. So don't have the earphones on so loud you can't pay attention. And if you do have a cab tractor, you better look at what's behind you every now and then to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. I know I have when combining, the first thing I was to smell smoke, and uh-oh, that's a bad smell when you're out in the middle of a dry grain field, right? And so, yeah, we got to think. And what was the reason for that smoke? A failing part. Once there's no lubrication, once that bearing housing fails, and things are just kind of crumpling on you, you've got troubles. Tasking and sequencing is something that's really something that you have to understand. Remember all those 634 hours, or not, well, no, it's more than that. I think 634 hours or 2 years in that vineyard for that 1 acre. I drilled all those holes the night before, right? So knowing that we're going to plant that day, it was nice to have those holes done, right? So that 3 or 4 hours that it took to put in those 640 holes, was that's me on running down through there. And before we put those holes in the ground, I put a stake in each one of those. Right, so I was by myself and drilled all those holes. And look how that's pretty perfect, isn't it? I didn't use a laser, but that's pretty perfect. And it was because there was a lot of careful thought and planning and sequencing that made that occur, right? And so the last thing you want to do is go hook up the auger and all the plants are coming and let's plant. I guarantee you're not going to have a very pretty looking vineyard by the end of the day, because especially planting day you're going to have 5 or 6 people there. And if you didn't do all that legwork at the beginning, you would have a pretty sloppy looking vineyard. And you certainly wouldn't finish that day, probably, right? And so then you'd really be behind this. So careful thought and preparation and putting the task in sequence, and think about this, I got this narrow amount of time to accomplish this task, right? And so, and of course, maximizing the usage of your machinery. There's always economics we can pull into that. So how can we measure machinery being used as economic maximum? Get an economist. No, it's really pretty hard actually sometimes to justify expenses in machinery, and so that's something we really want to think about. And it might be better than I'm only going to do this hole drilling thing one time. It might be better that I go ahead and lease the auger, right? The Dems and auger, and so that way I can use that machinery at economic maximum. So there again, drilling those holes and getting ready for planting. We actually used a post driver to put so that was something we rented. We brought a post driver in, we started putting the posts in. And here's Bill Kirby, he just passed away this year. Bill was instrumental in the Southern Maryland Vineyard team, and that was planting day. And so we planted all those in one day. And there's Herb. And so by the end of that day, on April 24th, 2001, we had the vineyard in place, trickle tube and training stakes and everything. So pretty impressive when you think about it. And it grows fast. And then you think about all the trellis and materials, and we're using those max tapeners and different things to get the trellis up. There's Ben and Herb been there working diligently, me taking pictures. And tell them how good a job they're doing. And but it is a lot of fun, right? It's a lot of good work.
That's a what, 3-month-old vineyard.
That's June of the first year.
Yeah.
That's
show you what
that's
what
60
you need to be
days.
prepared for, possibly.
That's 60 days later. Yeah. And so, and Ben will show you some more pictures, I think, from the same series of slides. But with spraying equipment, most of us say, "Oh, I don't really want to spray." Well, you're going to learn that spraying is really essential, and I'm probably going to do a lot more of it than you ever thought you would ever have to do if you're going to keep your vineyard alive and successful and be able to sell your grapes. If you're going to sell them commercially, they're going to require that you are diligent to that. So spraying and understanding spraying equipment, all the plumbing and all the nozzle selections, and that's why I say get a technician if this is new to you. To when that sprayer comes to the farm. Hey, I need some help here. Make sure we talked about the proper nozzles, have it set up to go. Make sure that you get some water in it and go out and play with it with a technician. And make sure you think about your target. And your target changes, right? You know, at bud break, you got a very small target, right? And so you really don't need fan pressure at that point. You might just need nozzle. Maybe one set of nozzles and then as the canopy grows, more nozzles, more fan speed, and of course when's your full canopy. So you're constantly, calibration is not just as simple as I'm going to hook the sprayer up, my tech calibrated for me, and now I'm ready to spray my vineyard all season long, right? And so it's constant calculations and determinations. Why is the spray pressure always, should be always more at the pump gauge than at the boom gauge? So if you were to measure out on the boom, it's really true on some of your broadcast sprayers where you're putting herbicides down. It's always, there's friction, right, in the pump. And so you're moving fluid, and you're also moving, the pesticides themselves have weight. The gallon of water is 8.3 pounds. But you might have a 12-pound gallon of product in that tank, and that takes that's a heavy fluid. And so you'll have a high pump pressure, but you might not have at the nozzle the right pressure. So it's good to have nozzle pressure checks too. So there's just a lot of things to determine. Spraying equipment is about understanding plumbing. Agitation is something that you want to make sure that you understand your agitation system, and there's usually a jet agitator in a tank to keep things into suspension, but you got to make sure that fluid is bypassing the pump into the agitation system. You've got to be mindful of that. That's a good thing to watch and make sure all these things are working when you have just water in the tank, right? You can kind of explore it. Boom height, if you're talking about herbicides, you got to be right height off the target for adequate pressure, coverage on the floor when you're doing herbicide applications. What are the 3 items of consideration for calibration of a sprayer? What 3 items? Speed, how fast you go, right? What else? Pressure, what's the pressure at, right? And then it would be pressure, speed, and the tip selection, the orifice size on the tip, right? So that's your calibration options that you have. And TJET is a great catalog for looking at different nozzles. So you probably want to think about stocking pesticides in some type of pesticide storage facility. The inner room in here is actually the storage the chem room, and this is the mixing shed. It's nice to have a nice dedicated facility like that. I do often teach about herbicides. I just want to make aware of you that there's a lot of herbicides now and a lot of ways to use these different products. And I break them down into burn down, pre-emergence, and post-emergence. You're going to probably want to learn about how to use these herbicides successfully. We can't go into that now, but that's certainly a big part of using those sprayers to your advantage.
Copies of those are on their flash drive.
Very good, very good. They're also, we've got them on the websites too. And then I do a little small fruit spraying guide that actually has grapes in there. So you can start to look at that too for some information. And within that, again, the herbicides are broken out. And again, you start to think about chemical inventory. You don't need everything in the world, but you're going to need some very strategic purchases in this area to get your vineyard off to a good start. And so think about that. That's the chem room in Upper Marlboro. We got just about everything there because we do about 37 different research projects there. Sprayers come in all kinds of purchases, and you know, something just this, all you really need probably to do a good job to put down a little bit of herbicides on the floor, which might be all you need. And then something like this probably would be your best choice probably for your canopy management. But there are other types too. Spray application, mixing and chemical sequencing, very important. Again, calibration. And a farmer discovers a leak while spraying. What should they do? Spray like thunder, spray as fast as they can. No, they need to probably think about what can I do to isolate that leak, right? And then hopefully, if you're prepared for leaks, you can make that fix in the field, right? And then maybe spray out that tank so you're not bringing back essentially a dirty tank, right? That's dripping and leaking, right? So be prepared for leaks and things to occur. Have spare parts, have vice grips, have things that you can do to repair nozzle bodies and different things like that. So very important. Always think about, it's nice to have dedicated sprayers. I would recommend a sprayer that's dedicated for your canopy applications, and then that would be your fungicides and insecticides, and then have your herbicide sprayer separate from that. That way you won't get in trouble. You won't be sabotaging your own vineyard by putting herbicides on the canopy. And I will caution you to not use Roundup in your vineyard, especially if you're a new sprayer, okay? That's the quickest way to destroy everything you're working for. Not because it's certainly a toxic, but because it's systemic and causes death to the plants. And so that's the real key to that. What procedure ensures thorough rinsing of the sprayer? It's usually like a triple rinse procedure, right? But you want to break down the sprayer too. Take out the nozzle bodies and clean up the screens and the checks and all those things, and really break the sprayer down. And then go through the process of about a triple rinse. And one of those might be best to have some type of cleaner. So flush and then put in a full amount of water and then put a cleaner in there that actually cleans the sprayer, and then dump that out and then one more final rinse, and now you've got a thoroughly rinsed and clean sprayer. So there's the orchard sprayer we had at Upper Marlboro. Keeping droplet size is very important. That's a great reflection upon pressure and nozzle size, the orifice of the nozzle. And so we're shooting for about a staple diameter, which is 420 microns, because that gives us the least ability to drift off target. And so that's something that's very important. Question?
You mentioned about rinsing
Yes.
the spray equipment.
Yes.
What is the safest way of handling that water?
The rinse, what I would recommend is the first rinse should be collected and reused. And you should spray hopefully clean in the field. And you can rinse in the field. You can carry water or additional water tanks on a sprayer to actually flush the spray rig in the field, and then come back, and there's very little actually in the rinse aid after that if you do a field flush, which is what I typically used to recommend and do. So nozzles, really nozzle technology has dramatically changed, and so again, most of our air blast sprayers are going to use full cone nozzles, but most of our ground applications we can use some of these really wonderful technologies now in reduction of drift. And so we have some really great nozzle tech. In fact, some of the labels now require the proper nozzle. So we're seeing products that are requiring the proper nozzle. This was a little backpack sprayer I had a few years ago. It's hard to believe that's me there, Joe. That's about when I started this venture and extension. And those are peach trees there. And so again, you can start out with something wrong with that picture, but what's wrong with this picture? Yeah. I don't have any personal protective equipment on, do I? So hopefully you just got water in that tank, right? But it is important to think about safety, and it would be nice to have something on there. You can see it's a pretty hot part of the year, so. But yeah, we need to, and a lot of times personal protective equipment by the label might just be a long sleeve shirt, long pants, maybe spray resistant boots and gloves, and maybe an N95 dust mask might be all we need for most of our products. And so, but yeah, that's protection, and that really goes a long way in reducing exposure. So just make sure you look at what's required on the label for the products that you're using and wear that personal protective equipment. And if it is something like daily clothes that you might wear, they should go in the wash machine, right? After you have maybe even a separate washer or pre-washing for your pesticide applicator clothes. So keep that in mind. But we can really suit up too. And when we get like that, now we know we can get to like 99% sure that we're not going to have any pesticide exposure, right? And so again, we can really do a great job of reducing the potential for pesticide exposure. So chemical cartridge respirators, I'm trying to think, I don't even know of any products that we currently use that we require that charcoal respirator, except for some of the insecticides. That if we go back to some of the organophosphates and carbamates, that we actually need a charcoal, active charcoal respirator, so cartridge respirator. But if you do need personal protective equipment, Gempler's is a really great place to buy. I think they're a little expensive, but they do have a nice choice. My favorite for price is actually this Northern Safety and Industrial. They have and they have my favorite mask, which is this Honeywell North 7700. If you really want to have complete assurity that you're not breathing any fumes or vapors off of these pesticides, which I would recommend actually, you can have a cartridge and a really nice fitting silicone, very comfortable mask, and that Honeywell is probably the best out there. So that's been my favorites. And believe me, I've used them all. But I do love that one. There we are with that's Pinot Noir in the vineyard at Upper Marlboro. Looks pretty good, doesn't it, Joe? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really pretty amazing. You can see, of course, you get in. You got to think about laboratory supplies and acid testing and pH. And bricks. And so here's me with a refractor and seeing what we're doing. And that's always the hard part, right? Getting to 22% sugar. It's really sometimes that can be difficult. So when you start thinking about purchasing, how am I doing for time, Joe? About an hour? Close? 5? So?
Yeah.
Okay. There's these search engines we got now to get used equipment, really important. Anyone ever heard of Lancaster Farming Magazine? Subscribe to that, because if you're looking for equipment, that's a great place to get it. It comes out weekly, and I read through that thing every week. And if you need equipment, new or used, I don't think you're going to find better options than Lancaster Farming. Of course, Delmarva Farmer. There's other magazines that are pretty good, but this one's really great. And one thing I want to share to finish up with is just safety. You look at this, it's kind of sobering when you think about it. I heard something, the statistic, and I haven't researched it yet, but I can't remember where I read it, but it caught my eye. It said that a farmer, those engaged in agriculture, are 800 more times likely to be injured on the job than, let's say, the average worker. The average 800 times more. And I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty. And then we look at death rates, and we see that forestry and agriculture, fishing and hunting are right up there at the highest death rates per 100,000. So that's the average 26.8. That's the highest of any industry. And so again, it's this machinery that you buy and it's going to remove drudgery can also kill you. And so you have to be careful of that and mindful of that. The tractors roll over, and so it's very important. In fact, if you look at the number one cause of death, it's tractor rollover almost every year. And so it's right up there per 100,000. Somewhere around 5 to 8 people will die a year because a tractor rolled over on them per 100,000 operators. That's a pretty substantial amount of death. And then tractor runover is right there next. You think, well, how do you get run over by a tractor? Well, you do things like start the tractor with a screwdriver, or someone doesn't know you're there and takes off with the tractor, right, and runs you over. And so you're typically going to run over someone in your family more than likely. And a lot of times it's our little ones, right? And so, I just can't even imagine. And of course, other things, I've certainly witnessed this, PTO entanglement. And, that's a really sobering thing to see. And so, we don't want to be there. So we got to be really careful. And so we look about the distribution of agricultural injury, and we can see frequency. And actually, horses are the number one. And so horses are most dangerous to be around. We're even more dangerous than tractors, it appears, by quite a bit, actually. Frequency of injury. This isn't death. This is injury. And you can see then we can come on down. But there's a lot of things that we might do on this operation out here in the vineyard that can add up to a lot of injury, right? And so I think we took Herb to the doctor when he cut his finger pretty good with pruning shears one day. And so just little things, okay, time to go get stitches. So it's something to always think about. Think about age-appropriate tasks. It's very important too. You're going to have family members, and they're going to want to be engaged, and pruning shears are pretty scary things, really. And so keep that in mind. It needs to be age-appropriate. Other injury, a lot of times, common victim characteristics. I think that's kind of interesting. Lack of knowledge on how to operate the tractor or do the job. That's number one. Fatigue. not accustomed to climatic conditions, so they're overheated, right? Or maybe they're too cold. Improper footwear, and that I see that all the time. I think about what I was required by the crops masters ahead of me. You would never show up into work without work boots and work pants and work gloves and a work shirt. And, you dress like you were going to. But I don't see that anymore. I see people pretty much wear whatever they want to wear, sandals and shorts. And I'm thinking, you're really not dressed appropriately for actually what you're getting ready to do out here, and that is, where you're likely going to get hurt. Other things, of course, mental health, substance abuse, other things there. And then you look over worker environment characteristics that happen. Extra riders on the tractor. Operator is permitted to start the tractor from the ground, maybe because not proper machinery maintenance. Workers are allowed or expected to use machinery without safety guards. They don't ever take those safety guards off. If you don't think of anything else, you got to do that. Anyway, vegetable and fruit news is something I'm the editor of, and Joe talked about his timely viticulture tips. Always put them in there. Plus other things are related to fruit science are in that from time to time. And you'll see things like the spotted lanternfly. You get at least monthly updates, and alerts will come out with this too whenever we need them. So make sure you subscribe to Veg News, Vegetable and Fruit News, and we will cover the vineyard industry in that as well. There's my website, Google and Arundel extension, and I actually have a lot of slideshows on there. So if you want to see a slide series on vineyard weed control, it's in there. Vineyard establishment's in there. So again, it's really nice. Right now they're just static slides, but I hope to make a YouTube channel with all of them. I got ambitious 32 of them to put on YouTube, so I got a little bit of work ahead of me. So anyway, that's it, Joe, for now. Questions?
Questions for Dave?
I do have one. You mentioned, the hazards of Roundup.
Yes.
We have an old tobacco farm in Charles County, and tobacco went out some time ago, but it's been Roundup ready soybeans and corn for 20 years.
Yeah.
How long of a period after that last year of application of Roundup ready?
Roundup is very short-lived in the environment,
Okay.
and I'm not concerned about Roundup from a toxicology standpoint.
Okay.
I'm concerned about it from killing your vineyard.
Yeah, right.
Because it's a systemic herbicide.
Yeah,
Okay? Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So there's no residual toxins in
No. In fact, Roundup is so tightly bound that it's not likely to leave that soil. And then microbially, it's broken down. I think it's within 57 days. It's absolutely gone. And most of the time, much quicker. And so it's basically, but the idea of a systemic herbicide, if it gets on any bud or green tissue on that, especially those young vines, it can kill them outright that year, or it can weaken them severely, so they actually hit very low growth for the next 2 to 3 years. And so it can one time really cripple the likelihood of success with your vineyard, the misapplication.